long way home. And I've seen the mothers mourn the loss of their only born. But still I believe we are given nothing more than we can bear. Our vision is only blurred when life seems unfair. So who am I to judge the man with the needle in his veins when he's just chasing freedom to escape the pain of the world's fast-paced pipe dreams and shortcomings? He's just trying to make do, find a way out of nothing. It's like we're damned if we do, and damned if we don't. And it's a very thin line between respect and being broken, being one red button away from World War III. Always called the minority, and always pulled over, facing police brutality. Why is every street a living hell? Probably because they want us to fail, yeah. 3 strikes will surely pack the jail, like the slave ships when they sail. Whoa, whoa.
Good afternoon, everybody. How is everybody feeling? We want to first of all welcome everybody to Lakeview Public Library and apologize for the delay. There has been a slight delay in terms of our guest speakers, but in the interim, we do have another part of the program that we're going to move up shortly. First of all, there's a choir that is prepared to sing for you, and they are almost ready. So we're going to move that part of the program up to give the speakers time to get here, and so that we can benefit from this beautiful month of Black History and the great words of wisdom, as well as the experience that they would like to share with you that unfortunately they were forced to go through, but nevertheless it's part of history, and it's something that we all need to acknowledge and to learn from. And they certainly have benefited from, in the sense of, sometimes when bad things happen, there's a brighter side to it. And we know that in each case they've become active in the community and in speaking up for others who can't speak up for themselves. So we applaud that, and we'd like to, again, as I said, thank you for coming out, and we'd like to proceed.
Anybody ever heard about the Central Park 5? So with regards to that, most of the times when I come in front of groups of people, if they've heard about the Central Park Jogger case itself, all they remember about the case is they'll say something like, "Oh yeah, that Wilding case." That's what the residue of the way that the media covered the case. I'm going to say that word.
We can't hear you back here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I should pick this up. Here we go. How about that? All right. All right, so the residue of the media's coverage of the case back in 1989 was so serious that it caused most people to only remember most of the negative aspects of what happened. Meaning, there was a young white woman that was jogging in the park, and there were, the way that the media told the story was that there were these animals roving around from the darker enclaves of society, seeking out victims to assault. And that's what stuck with people. It stuck with people so much so that when the media drew us, they drew us in a manner that made people think that we were looking like big apes and gorillas and all kind of crazy stuff. And if you saw any photos of us back then, these photos portrayed us after they may have said something like, "You jigaboo," "You coon," and of course you're looking around like, what the heck is they talking about? But when you turn around and look like that, they catch you, they take that picture, and now when they put that out to the world, here you go looking to everyone who doesn't know you. Look, you look crazy, Back then, before the case had even started, I think maybe within the first week, there were about 400 articles written about the Central Park Jogger case. Donald Trump took out full-page ads in New York City's newspaper calling for the reinstatement of the death penalty, specifically for our cases. And so what this meant, the context of what this meant was, had this been the 1940s, the 1930s, definitely the 1920s, possibly the 1950s, they would have drug us out of our houses and took us to Central Park, strung us up, and we would have been strange fruit hanging from a tree. And it would have been that would have been it, you know? This thing was so racially charged that it caused even people in the media, specifically a guy named Pat Buchanan, he wrote an article in which he said, if we took the eldest one, who was Kharey Wise, he was 16 years old. If we took the eldest one and we hung him from a tree in Central Park, and we took the others and we horsewhipped them, then maybe the city's park will be safe again. Now I say all of that to say, anybody in the room knows that the Central Park 5 were actually exonerated? Okay. In New York City, there are huge amounts of people who don't even know that we are outside living our lives as free people. They think that we're still in jail. You know? All they heard was Mayor Koch back then saying that this is the crime of the century. Mayor Koch back then, when they picked us up saying we got them, you know, and people were done with us. They labeled us with labels like urban terrorists. You know, and so if you're from an Islamic faith, you know, that label, that name means so much more now. But the way that they portrayed you back then, that if you're labeled as a terrorist, you're labeled as a wolf pack, you're labeled as animals. You know, this was the colorful language that they used to describe people of color most times. And what's interesting about this case as well is that it points to a whole host of things that goes wrong. Things that go wrong when lawyers aren't able to properly do their jobs. Things that go wrong when the police are out for blood and they don't care whether they got the right perpetrators of the crime or not. Because people always ask us things like, you know, well, were you guys in the park that night? Because there was other things that happened. It wasn't just about the Central Park Jogger. It became sensationalized because the Central Park Jogger was near death. She was beaten senseless. She lost about 3/4 of her blood. They didn't expect her to live. So it became sensationalized because of that. And most people, well, the city itself called it the Central Park Jogger case, you know, but there was other things that happened. But what was very interesting is one, when the Central Park Jogger came to the courthouse and testified, she was asked, do you see the people that assaulted you in the room? And she was known to have amnesia back then. She looked around and she said, no, I can't identify anyone in this room that assaulted me. They brought the other victims who had been assaulted in the park that night, who did not have amnesia, and asked them, do you see anybody who assaulted you in this room? And they too looked around the courtroom, looked at the defendants, and said, none of these guys are the guys who assaulted me. But yet we still went to jail. Kharey Wise, let me tell you how wild this is. Kharey Wise, he and I were best friends back then. And Kharey was asked by the police officers when they came to my door the next day. They said, well, you know, your name isn't on this paper that we're looking at, but do you want to come downtown with your buddy? He'll be right back. This is what they told him. Kharey came home 13 years later. I came home 7 years later. When you see this film, it shows how, one, had the police done their jobs, there would have been a young Latino woman who was pregnant at the time. She would have been alive today. The guy who raped the Central Park Jogger, everybody knew about this person because in New York City, he was known as the East Side rapist or the East Side slasher. But they didn't put one and one together to make two, you know? So what they did was they said, no, we got them, we got the right people, we got what we consider a more attractive story. And that more attractive story was, it has to be these 5 people from the darker enclaves of society, these animals that we're gonna portray as wolf packs. It has to be these people to have had assaulted this one woman, as opposed to 13 years later when the truth comes out, it being this one person who knows everything about what he did 13 years ago, who can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, through not only his testimony, but also his DNA. Because back then, they told people, we got DNA. You know, I remember back then it was like all over the papers, it said DNA evidence. And then it was quickly swept underneath the rug because there was no DNA match. Like many people forget about that. So the only thing they remembered was DNA evidence. But they didn't remember there was no match. 13 years later, the DNA evidence that they had met its match. And so when the East Side rapist, his name is Matias Reyes, when he came out and he said, I bumped into Kharey 13 years later while we were in a prison upstate. And I looked in his face and I saw anguish and pain. And at that point in time, he said that he had gotten God in his life. And he felt that it was his duty to make sure that he came forth and told the truth about this case. 1989, he chuckled and said, I got away with the perfect crime. So what? He's doing 33 and 30 years to life right now. But he got away with the perfect crime. You know, through his testimony, he was able to not only free Kharey, but free and also exonerate the rest of us. Many of us had already came home and we were trying to put the pieces of our lives back together. Because as you can imagine, if you're 15 years old and you have your life interrupted like that, you have your life snatched away from you, you no longer know what it's like to be a normal 15-year-old. You're thrust into a system where you're forced to grow up very, very quickly. 16 years old, which is just 1 year difference. They put us in Spofford, which is a juvenile detention center. They put Kharey in Rikers Island. So we were in a place where young people were. He was in a place where grown men were. You know what I'm saying? You can't get that back. You can't reverse that tragedy. That's such a tragedy. That's such a, man. But the wildest thing about it, though, too, is even though Matias Reyes came forward and said that he did it, even though he was able to get us vindicated, he can never be charged with the crime. Unfortunately, the statute of limitation for rape in New York is 7 years. 13 years later, he can't be charged. I don't know if you guys remember, but this was me. This was me back in 1989. About as tall as I am right now, maybe a little shorter. But skinny as you know, this was me. Walking into the courthouse, you know, and just pass this around a little bit. And what I want to maybe share with you all before we go into this film, because people always say to me, you know, how did you survive that? How did you survive having a label placed on you? A label that was going to most certainly cause you to possibly get hurt, possibly get killed in prison. The worst crime you can go to prison for is rape. The only crime that trumps rape in prison is child molestation, you know? And the inmates have their own way of dealing with that kind of crime. They don't let people like that go. They hurt people like that. And people always ask me, well, how did you survive this? You know, there was a piece of poetry that I remember, and I'll never forget this piece of poetry, because it changed my life. It was by a guy named The Teacher. It was a very succinct piece of poetry. And he simply said, prison life, in many ways, can be likened to the womb. If the life inside becomes stillborn, the womb becomes said, man, I have to do this time. I don't know why I'm doing it. I have to do this time, and I can't let the time do me. I have to get as much as I can get out of this situation so that when I come home, I can be that much more prepared to join society. Because we came home to parole. We came home to the laws being changed. It used to say on the books, it used to say, when you're going to fill out a job application, have you been convicted of a crime within the past 7 years? So, if it was a week later, I could say no, because it was 7 years in a week, because I had been in jail for 7 years. So I was like, no, dodge that bullet. And they changed the law. So right now, if you look at job applications, it says, have you ever been convicted of a crime? And if so, please state the crime. This will not hinder your chances with us. What a way to weed people out, huh? This is what they say. So we had, like I said, we resigned our lives to the reality of this label that was placed on us. And we kind of said, Dad, in spite of all of this, how are we going to survive? We were able to survive prison. We didn't die a social death in prison, a physical death in prison. So how do we survive on the streets? They wanted us to have every single door of success slammed in our faces. But here I am, and here we all are, you know? I mean, I've had some interesting opportunities after the fact. My first opportunities, I had a whole bunch of doors slammed in my face. But my mother, she was such a freedom fighter. She had started this organization called People United for Children, because she uncovered through her activism, because she became an activist through this whole process. She uncovered through her activism that most people who are in prison have some sort of involvement with I'm thinking about the organizations that put them into these places, but like ACS, VCW, they come into your homes and say, you know what, you are a bad parent. Your neighbors called and said you were beating your child. You know, all of that, child protective services. Back in the days, man, you know, you was told when you did something wrong, especially if you lived down south, boy, go out there and get a switch off the tree. And you better not come back with a little piece of straw. You know what I'm saying? That was discipline. That wasn't child abuse. And many of us turned out all right, you know? But when you have your children taken away from you like that, and the children sometimes think that, you know, okay, well, if I'm being bad, I'm going to call the cops on my parents. That's one of the worst things that you could do. Because unfortunately, when children are growing up, they don't grow up thinking that their parents were once children. They grow up thinking that their parents don't know what's going on. Their parents aren't as hip as they are. You know, but my mother used to tell me all the time, don't talk to the cops. If the cops come, let them break the door down. They are not your friends. And this is not true for all cops. But we know that when we look at the system itself, like I've been known to call the system the criminal system of injustice, not the criminal justice system. Because for many of us, the system itself fails us. You know, we want to be able to say, okay, the idea of justice is well and good. But the reality is that sometimes when you look at the color of your skin, and other people are looking at the color of your skin, you begin to realize very quickly that it is as if you're born guilty as opposed to being born free and born innocent. You have to prove that you're innocent most times. You don't come in the door and they look at you and say, look at this guy, he has a suit on, a tie on. All right, he's a good person. You got to prove that you're a good person. They don't give you that. That's not a, you know. I had an attorney back in my trial who was a divorce lawyer. And it was funny because I think about it now and I say, man, I had an attorney who was a divorce lawyer in a criminal case. But the only reason why I had that attorney was because we don't got, you know, most of the time you don't have lawyers on retainer. You know, people of color, we don't come a lot of times from money. So we gotta rely on the system, we gotta rely on friends, we gotta rely on family. You know, if somebody just happens to be a lawyer, the fact that they're a lawyer, we just say, well, hey, can you help me? You know, as opposed to, I need a criminal lawyer, so I had a divorce lawyer in a criminal trial. You know, during my appeal, I had Bill Kunstler as my attorney. But Bill Kunstler said something that I will never forget. You know, he said, this case is a case where Jesus Christ himself couldn't have won this. And his daughters, they made a film called William Kunstler, Disturbing the Universe. I'm not sure if if you guys have seen that film as well. Okay, but in the film, Bill Kunstler is talking about what it means to, like most people, when they think about law, most of the times when people think, okay, they got the Central Park Five, they arrested them, somehow they got these false confessions out of 4 of the 5. And so therefore, the system is working. Like we got the confessions, you know, but now when you look at the film, you're gonna realize that none of the confessions are the same. So somebody's gonna come into this room and they're gonna say, well, I came into the library and the room was brown. On tape. And somebody else is gonna say, nah, man, it was green. It was neon green at that. And this is the same thing that you see on these tapes. These 4 tapes that were made. I'm the only one that never made a written or videotaped confession. But my co-defendants made 4 completely different written and videotaped confessions. Kharey Wise himself made at least 3. You know, so that's a lot of false statements that are being made. But like I said, in 13 years after the fact, when the truth came out, here's a guy who's telling people, well, let me back up for a second. Who's here familiar with like shows like CSI New York, Miami, or LA? Even shows like Scandal nowadays, right? You know, you look at these TV shows and these TV shows tell you something about the system. What they tell you is forensic science is so profound, so intricate, so connected, that if something happened in this room and the forensic scientists were to come into this room, they could recreate the scene of the crime, so much so that they could say the assailant was 5 feet tall. And based on the splatter of blood, he was left-handed. And it was a man because of this. And based on the footprint, he wore a size 12 shoe. So they got all of this stuff that they look at, you know. But in the Central Park Jogger case, they went over our clothes with magnifying glasses, fine-tooth combs. You know, we didn't have a speck of evidence on us. Somebody told me once, they said, if you are a 15-year-old, you cannot make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without leaving DNA evidence. That DNA being jelly on the counter sometimes, peanut butter on the counter. Your parent comes home and says, who was in the kitchen? I know somebody was there because I see the evidence all over the place. But we didn't have any shred of evidence on us. This thing is so crazy that I didn't find this out until maybe about 5 months ago. They took Kharey Wise and Kevin Richardson back to the scene of the crime. And when they took Kharey specifically to the scene, they tried to bump him so that he could fall into the blood and have some evidence on him. This is how conniving and disgusting the system was towards us, you know? But getting back to these TV shows that teach us something about forensic science, when Matias Reyes came forth and he said, I was chasing after her, well, I was jogging after her, she didn't hear me because she had her headphones in her ears, which is something that we have to be very mindful of. My mother used to always tell me back in the days, leave one ear off and one ear on, because you want to be able to know what's going on in your surroundings. She had both headphones in her ear. He said that when she made a turn on 102nd Street in the park, that's where he first struck her with a tree branch. And the police kind of scratched their head and said, yep, that's where the first drops of blood were. Exactly where he's saying he struck her. And then he said he struggled with her, hit her a few more times, and then drug her off into the woods. And sure enough, they said, yeah, that's where the drag mark is, exactly where he said it was. in the false confessions, you got all these guys saying stuff like, it happened on the water. It happened around the reservoir. It happened all the way across town when in fact they knew that it happened right over here, meaning the police officers knew that it happened right over here as opposed to what they were getting, you know. But it just goes to show you that no one stopped this train that was going down the wrong way and said, hold up, let's rethink this. Let's reinvestigate this. Let's try to figure out why is this not adding up. They didn't do that. They kept on going down the wrong way. And they convinced the people of this lie, you know. I want to go into this film. Because this is the, we're not going to be able to see the whole thing tonight or today, but you know, it's a pretty long film. Now, this song, I'm gonna try to maybe stop and skip over a few things because this isn't really the official trailer or anything like that. This is the official movie that people have in the theater. But hopefully this will give you guys a taste of the film and as it related to everything that was going on back then.
My mother was teaching at Parsons University. She encouraged all of us to do good work, good quality work, whatever we did.
When I was a kid, I had a little hair problem. I just found myself just ignoring it to the point where it affected my life.
I grew up with a big family. A lot of women in my family. My mother plus 4 sisters.
He's the baby, and he was treated as such. And, you know, Mama's only boy out of 5 children and the baby. So he was just our heart's like joy, everybody's.
At that time, some kids like running that way, or some kids going the other way. Trying to find our way outside, out of the park.
It was between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock. I was leaving the park on that time. I had a curfew. I remember walking with this small group to the 1, 2, and the 3 train on Broadway. The only crime I committed that night was I hopped the turnstile.
On Central Park West, a car pulled up in front of me, and 2 officers jumped out, and one grabbed me, and when I turned back, the crowd scattered and everybody ran.
Police were chasing me, and I had nowhere else to go. So the wall, and you jump over the wall, and you go back into the park.
They handcuffed us and put him in the car, and then his partner ran, and he jumped over the wall into the park, and he took off.
Somebody told me to freeze, I would shoot. My fear even went up more, so I just kept running.
And 3 strikes will surely pack the jail. Like the slave ships when they sail, but they don't know how people